What up, everybody? Welcome to a glorious of Let's Ask Paul, as well as Master The NEC. So, welcome. So, kind of going to talk about a question I got asked last night, and it kind of is a question that I get asked quite a bit, and not the fact that I work for a wire and cable manufacturer as well, but the fact that people ask all the time how to understand ampacities and the tables and what we do with the ampacities and all those type of things. So a question kind of came in, and I'm paraphrasing it, is Paul, can you explain ampacity a little bit better when sizing branch circuits? And so I figured, okay, we'll go beyond branch circuits a little maybe, but I'll explain what we're talking about here as I do a little mobile lesson, if you will. So, hey, but I wanted to thank everybody for following us and getting our podcasts. Again, all you got to do is go to your favorite podcast listening platform and just look for Master The NEC, and you'll find us. Make sure you subscribe, share it with others on the job site. Let them know there's a podcast out there they can listen to. We have literally hundreds and hundreds of episodes, so if you want to scroll through, you certainly can find all of our episodes on all types of topics through the years. And soon we'll be having all of our podcasts. The link to our podcasts will be available on our new website, fasttracksystem.com. So again, we're in the works with that. We're still working on things. The Fast Tracks tube we're still working on, so patience. It's a lot of videos and stuff to move, so just be patient with us. But anyway, podcasts, there's tons of them on all different types of topics going back a couple years, but they're all very relevant, so check them out. All right, so ampacities, talk about it a little bit. Through the years, the ampacity tables, 310-16, which used to be 310-15B16, which before that was 310-16, has changed through the years when it comes to its numbering. The ampacities really haven't changed. There was an error a couple years ago, I think, in 3AWG that changed to whether it was 110 and 115, whatever. But for the most part, the ampacity tables in 310-16, they're pretty much unchanged for those insulation types that are listed in that table. Keep in mind that if you want to see all of the insulation types and their temperature ratings and all this type of stuff, then you want to go to 310.4. It used to be 310.104, but it's 310.4. And you can see all of the different, insulation types. For example, a lot of times people don't understand that XHHW, yes, has two H's, so high heat. So yes, it is 90, does have a W, but it's only good for 90 in dry locations. It's not good for 90 in a wet location. So we add the -2 on the end of it, a little extra testing, and now it's good for 90 degrees wet or dry, right? But again, it kind of throws you off, but you can tell by looking at 310-16 and going to the top and seeing where XHHW sits in the temperature spectrum, okay, under 75, and then see that it's also under the 90. And in order to really understand that, you'll end up having to go looking at the tables in 310.4. Okay? Now, if you're in the 2017 code, it's 310.104. All right, so comes to ampacity. The ampacities that are in 310-16, those are continuously, okay? All those amps you see under the condition of use, and we'll explain what condition of use is. But under the condition of use, that is the ampacity of that conductor, whether it's copper or aluminum, okay? That is the ampacity at that temperature indefinitely. So you could put enough current, whatever's on that table, you could put that current through that conductor indefinitely, and it wouldn't cause any problem with the insulation that is on the conductor. So remember, the amps is more about the insulation, that's that protective barrier, right? Obviously the copper can handle probably way more current than what we give in 310/16. Okay, none of the manufacturers really want to test for that. We don't want to change anything. Nobody's willing to go out on a limb and try to change insulation thicknesses or modernize it. Nobody's willing to do that, so that ain't going to change. I can tell you, nobody has that on the radar when it comes to Code Panel 6 or any of us manufacturers. I can promise you that. Okay. All right. So we're going to be with those ampacities for a while. Okay. Not going anywhere. Been like that for eons. Okay. But that is the ampacity at that temperature rating indefinitely, even a continuous load. All right. So the other thing that I want to talk about, shifting a little bit, is the term continuous load. Another thing that students, sometimes have to wrap their head around is that when we say something is a continuous load, so if I tell you we have 40 amps of continuous load, the actual load in question is 40 amps. But I'm telling you it's continuous. So it's going to be pulling those 40 amps continuously for 3 hours or more. So that's the first thing to think about. So there's a definition in Article 100, and try to get familiar with definitions because they really are important. We take them for granted, but Code Panel 1 oversees definitions, and other code panels will send their definitions to one, and it's changed in the 2023 where everything's under Article 100 now when it comes to definitions, instead of having it kind of spattered through the code. So get familiar with definitions. So continuous load is the maximum current for 3 hours or more. All right? So when I tell you something is 40 amps, it's just 40 amps. If you're sizing a conductor for it, we're sizing it for 40 amps, right? We're not talking about 210.19 A1A or A1B yet. We're just talking. So if I tell you to size something for 40 amps, you're going to go to the 310/16 and you're going to size it based on whatever your terminal limitations are, okay, and your temperature limitations. You got to know what 110.14 C1 and C2, you got to know about those, okay? You have to understand that, okay? Code references might be off a little bit, but I know it's 110.14 C. So assuming you know terminal limitations and temperatures and things like that for your terminals, if I tell you have 40 amps of load, then you're going to go to 310/16. If I tell you you have 40 amps of continuous load, then if I'm telling you it and you're sizing an overcurrent device to protect this load, to protect this conductor, then we have things that we have to do in the NEC that say, okay, well, you're telling me it's a continuous load. The load didn't change. It's still 40 amps. That didn't change. You're just telling me that it's continuous. Okay, well, if it's continuous and I'm sizing a conductor, then 210.19, okay, A1A is going to say, okay, I get you. It's a continuous load. All right, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to take that conductor, whatever the load is, since I know the load, and I'm going to take it at 125%. So basically, the 40 amps is 100%, right? So all I'm trying to do is add an additional buffer of 25%. That's it. And that 25% is going to mitigate the weaknesses of a standard overcurrent protected device, which typically 125, the reciprocal of that is 80%. So unless your breaker, let's say we'll just keep it simple, circuit breaker, unless the breaker is designed to be 100% rated, okay, then it doesn't matter about that additional 25% because the breaker's been rated for continuous loads. Most standard molded case circuit breakers, for example, are not. So whatever the rating is of the circuit breaker, you're going to multiply that by 80%, and then that's going to be the level of current at a continuous load. That's the level that you would put through that circuit breaker, okay? So how do we do that if we don't know what breaker we want, but we know the actual load? Well, like I said, if it's 40 amps and we know that it's going to be pulling 40 amps for 3 hours or more, again, the maximum current, that's the definition of continuous load, then we're going to have to take that 40 times 125%, right? Now, what's interesting is that also we get these rules for the overcurrent protection in 210.20 that also tell us if it's a continuous load, to take that continuous load at 125%. So you see how they'll work together. You ain't gonna worry. It's not brain surgery. It works together. Now, the only time this changes is if you get a breaker that is rated for 100%, and that means that you don't have to consider continuous loads. You just take it at the load is the load, right? Okay, so thinking about that, when we think about loads that are in our house or loads that are in a building, when you've got a commercial building and the lights are on, and you got to assume that they're lamped at the maximum value, even though you could reduce the lampage, okay? You have to take them at what could be put in there. So if the lamps are on, and they are, commercial building, they're on all day, then that's a continuous load. Now, interesting, in the 2020 cycle, as well as the 2023, when you got the VA per square foot in table 220.12, when you're doing a load calculation, it already takes into consideration the 125% for your lighting. So it kind of saves you a step. If you're in the 2017 code, it doesn't, you got to remember to do that, because it doesn't do that. But 2020, it does. So people ask me all the time, what was a change in that? And it's just the fact that they did it for you when it came to the VA per square foot. Took care of it already for you. But in 2017, you got to remember that whatever your square footage is times the VA per square foot based on that table, you got to make sure that you also take that at 125%, so you can make up for the fact that that's continuous load lighting, right? So that's just one example. In a dwelling, there's very few, if any, continuous loads. Most certainly not for the service or feeder calc, but there are continuous load applications for things like the branch circuit to a water heater, right? Because it actually tells you that the minimum sizing requirement, for example, for a water heater in 422.13, I believe, don't hold me to that, I'm driving, I don't have my code book with me, that you're going to take that minimum wise at 125%. That's a minimum rule, right? And that's for 120 gallon water heaters or less. You could have a bigger water heater, and then you're going to end up going up, and I can't remember, I think it's 422.11 E, I believe, whatever, that gives you the 150% if it's over 13.3 amps. And we kind of go through that in our lessons in the fast tracks, okay? But I digress. The point being is, the code will tell you when certain things are to be taken as continuous load. And then if that's the case, it's directly telling you to take it as a continuous load. You don't have to worry about, okay, is it on for 3 hours or more at its maximum output? No, we don't have to worry about it, because the code is telling me, point blank, take this as a continuous load. Okay, so that makes it easy for us. Any other application, you need to look at it and determine whether or not it's actually a continuous load or not, right? Now, interesting is, in a commercial building where lighting might, be considered a continuous load, your receptacles would not be, unless an engineer specifies a specific load to a specific piece of equipment that will pull its maximum current for 3 hours or more, right? Other than that, the receptacles, maybe it's the receptacles you're adding in there for like office building, things like, you're not going to take those as continuous load. They're just receptacles, intermittent use, right? But that's why it's so important as an electrical professional and design professionals, is to look at it and say, okay, well, what is the load in question? Is it going to be pulling its maximum current? Maybe it's for a specific piece of equipment, and then they will determine whether or not that's a continuous load or not. And you simply got to work that into your calculation, whether you're doing the optional or standard, right? So that's kind of all kinds of things that you have to take into consideration. Now, interesting thing about branch circuits is the ampacities. So if you haven't done a lesson or did my derating demystified video, of course you can't get it unless you're an annual subscriber. But the derating demystified video, we talk about the fact that when it comes to a branch circuit, if I've got continuous loads, then I have to size the conductor and use 210.19A1A. If I don't have any adjustment or corrections, what are they? Well, remember earlier when I talked about the ampacities in table 31016? That is a perfect world, okay? That is perfectly when the ambient temperature is 30 degrees Celsius, 86 degrees Fahrenheit. That's perfect world. If it's anything other than that, right? If it's hotter or colder than that, then it's, guess what? If it's hotter or colder than that, then you're going to have to make a correction, right? And you're going to end up using tables like 31015B1. If you're in the 2017 code, it's 31015B2A. And then, of course, the other one we call an adjustment. An adjustment is based on the number of current carrying conductors you have, okay? So you have more than 3 current carrying conductors, you're going to have to make an adjustment. And where that takes place is in 31015C1 if you're in the 2020 code or higher. But it's in 31015B3A if you're in the 2017 code. So that changes the condition of use. And what does that mean? That means since the ampacities that are in 31016 are designed to be continuously under that condition of use, if anything deviates from that condition of use, which that table is based on, then I've got the ampacity of the conductor changes, right? And so we have to account for that. That's why you use those other tables, right? Now, in 210.19A1A and A1B, you're supposed to compare the two if those conditions exist. So in other words, if I had a continuous load only, and I was sizing the branch circuit, and I was trying to remember that I have to at least size it to handle the load, so that's a given. But then I go to 210.19A1A, and it says, okay, well, if it's a continuous load, I have to size this conductor based on 125%, okay, of the load. I get you. And we size the conductor, right? But that means there was no condition of use involved. It means it was a perfect world. 30 degrees Celsius, 86 degrees Fahrenheit, and not more than 3 current carrying conductors. Well, me and you both know that that's just not going to be the case. We know that, right? Me and you all, we all know this. Chances are you're going to have some type of condition to use, whether you ignore it or not, or don't take it into consideration, or just, block it out of your mind. Something's got to be adjusted to that ampacity. Okay? Now, if that's the case, we've sized the conductor based on 210.19A1A because it was a continuous load, right? And we sized it. We took that 40 amps at 125%. Then we went to 31016 and we found the conductor under the 60 or 75 degree column, depending on what we're dealing with. If we don't know what the terminals are, then we're going to do it under the 60 because 110.14C1A is telling us that if it's 100 amps or less, right, and it's 14 through 1 gauge, if we don't know what the terminals are, then we have to be in the 60 degree column, right? Now, if we knew that it was THHN and we knew that the lugs were 75 degrees C, even though it's under 100 amps, then we could go to the 75 degree column to pick our conductors because we're using the allowance of 110.14C1A3. And that says, hey, if your lugs are rated 75 or higher, if your conductor's insulation is rated 75 or higher, and the terminations are rated 75 or higher, hey, you can forget about the 14 through 1 or the 100 amps or less. You can use the ampacity based on the 75, okay? That's what it says. It says it right there in 110.14C1. So that's what we would do, right? So you got to know all these things. That's why electricians, that's why I tell people, education is king. If you're out there just pulling cable, you're pulling conductors, but you don't understand the inner workings of the NEC, then you're selling yourself short. You're not a specialist. That's what I'm an electrician. I'm not an electrical worker, right? You might be good at pulling conductors and putting conductors in raceways and bending conduit because you're just a machine. You're just going through the motions. You're not learning the mental part. That's what's going to make you a well-rounded electrician. It's going to make your life so much easier because you start to understand why these things are what they are, right? So if I've got an installation, and we're talking about that 40 amps of continuous load, and I've got an installation and it had a continuous load, then I'm going to size my conductor based on 210.19A1A. Now, what if it's a continuous load, but what if I had an ambient temperature that was other than 30 degrees Celsius or 86 degrees Fahrenheit? Now I've got to do another calculation to size a conductor, but I'm going to be using 210.19A1B. And that's going to go through our sizing rules where we have to use the various tables to make an adjustment or correction to a conductor's size, because the ampacity is going to change due to the number of conductors or the ambient temperature, right? I know this could be confusing. And I know you're probably saying, Paul, I'm having a hard time following along. And I get it, because it's a podcast. This is why people go and get our videos. This is why people take our courses, because this is this cool stuff that you really need to learn to look at something and really truly understand why you do what you do, right? And I still get excited about it today because it's just it's an amazing thing. And I'm telling you, conductor sizing is one of the most complicated aspects of the NEC. Not looking up stuff and just regurgitating it for an installation, securing and support. This makes you think. This makes you understand how this works. And once you get the pieces, it's fun, it's cool. And it's what every electrician should strive to understand. So when I'm doing a branch circuit now, if I have an adjustment or correction, guess what happens? I forget about the continuous load. I forget about it. Now I use that 40 amps of actual load, and I use that with my adjustment or corrections to size my conductors that way. And whichever one yields in a bigger conductor, whether it's A1A or A1B, two separate calculations, whichever results in a bigger conductor, guess what? That's the one you're going to use. That's the minimum size branch circuit. So I know you're probably thinking, well, Paul, can you go into more detail here? No, I can't, because you have to see it, you have to feel it, I encourage you, if you only subscribe for 1 month, and cancel, go to our website, electricalcodeacademy.net, and subscribe to our monthly subscription before it's gone, because it's ending. We're getting rid of the monthly subscription. Although I would say that doing the annual is going to give you access to all of our videos, but once we switch to Fast Track's Tube in the next couple months, everybody that's a current annual subscriber, if you've been a member for 3 months, it doesn't matter. Once we switch, you're automatically going to get a whole new year, okay? So you're going to get the part that you paid plus the part that you've already used, right? So if you purchased an annual and you used 6 months and you have 6 more months available, when we switch to Fast Track's Tube, you're automatically going to get a year. So that means you've got your additional 6 months that you paid for, right? But you're going to get an additional free 6 months because it's not piggybacked, right? We're not going to take your last 6 months and then put another year on it. We're going to immediately, whatever we start, we're going to give you another year. So you're going to get your 6 months more that you paid for the whole year, but then you're going to get another 6 months for free, okay? Everybody's going to get that once we switch to Fast Track's Tube. Another example is if you were in your last month of a 1-year period, guess what? You're going to get a whole nother year for free. Yeah. And that means any of the new videos we add, anything we're working on out of the new studio, once we get moved to the new studio, you're going to get all of that. Plus, you show your support for us. And that annual subscription really does show support for us, and we appreciate it. If there's one way you want to give back to all the stuff that we do, and I hear people daily say thank you for everything you do, the easiest way to give back to us and you get something out of it is to do an annual subscription. We appreciate the annual subscriptions. One, it allows us to continue to do what we do and bring you the education. That's what we're trying to do, right? We appreciate the courses, and there's many of you that support us with the annual and the courses. And again, it's a beautiful thing, and we appreciate every one of you. You have no idea, all right? But we want to bring you more content. And we want to bring you Fast Tracks 2, Fast Tracks Chat. We want to bring you the Sparky Hub. We want to expand on all these things, and we're just excited that we can bring it to you. So hopefully you got something out of today's lesson. I didn't get too deep with it, but again, we talked about it. So, hey folks, stay safe, have a good weekend, and stay blessed, and we will see you next week. Take care.